who you are as a person and as a South Asian. You also want to grow up as a full and equal member of this society. You want to grow up to your full potential as an individual. You want to grow up proud of who you are as South Asian, while at the same time free to participate in and partake of a variety of cultural and social experiences. You want to grow up not as a second-class citizen, here at the sufferance of an exclusive dominant group, but as a full-fledged member of a multicultural, multiracial, and multi-faith society, able to make the choices you want to make for yourselves. These are all fair and reasonable expectations. In a relatively young country where everyone, with the exception of the First Nations peoples, has come from someplace else, it should be possible to build a society that treats all races and cultures as equal. Indeed, the Constitution of the country and the Human Rights Code of this province protect and provide for this right to equality and equity. If I may quote briefly from the preamble to the Ontario Human Rights Code, and I quote, "It is public policy in Ontario to recognize the dignity and worth of every person and to provide for equal rights and opportunities without discrimination that is contrary to law." Discrimination in this province is contrary to law. It is that simple. As the Human Rights Code states more explicitly, and I quote, "Every person has a right to equal treatment with respect to services, goods and facilities without discrimination because of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, age, marital status, family status, or handicap. Who you are, in other words, should have no bearing on your right to receive services without discrimination." One such service, and perhaps the most important for you as young people, is education. You have the right to an education that you as young South Asian Canadians require and deserve. To me, this means an education that is not only free from racism and stereotyping, but that actively identifies and challenges racism, be it conscious or unconscious. It means an education that includes the history, culture, and experiences of all Canadians and does not present the history, culture, and experiences of some Canadians as universal. It means an education system that provides for equality of opportunity and equity of results for all students. It means an education system that has at all levels, from teacher to senior administration, people from all the different communities that make up this society. I am concerned that, generally speaking, the education system has failed the grade when it comes to providing service without discrimination on the basis of race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, and creed. Although boards of education have begun to develop and implement anti-racism education policies, there is little evidence that the specific concerns and expectations of South Asians have been understood or dealt with. These are not new. The community has raised them for at least 20 years. In the introduction that I wrote to the book that Sarabjit mentioned, East Indians, Myths and Reality, which was published in 1978, I stated the reason for preparing the book as follows. It was towards the end of 1976 that some of us began to think about the urgent necessity of a resource book such as East Indians, Myths and Reality. We were concerned about the prevailing racial situation, and we were dissatisfied with the kinds of materials being used in schools regarding our community and our background. Those of us who had visited schools to speak with teachers and children, as resource persons were quite simply appalled by the widespread presence of stereotypes with respect to India and Indians. We felt that perhaps we could make a contribution in improving the state of affairs if we offered a set of materials that gave a comprehensive, accurate, and analytical view of India and the Indians living here. As far as the education of South Asian youth is concerned, the state of affairs that we talked about in that introduction has improved only marginally in the years since the above statement was made. A major reason for the what I call benign neglect with which the educational needs and expectations of the South Asian community have been treated is the perception that children from this community are by and large academically successful and that they have few problems. As a result of this perception, very little effort has been made to develop a systemic and systematic understanding of, or approach to the needs, expectations, and experiences of this group. The perception that South Asian youth are doing well academically would appear to be supported by statistics such as those collected by the Toronto Board of Education. It is not surprising that these kinds of findings, such as the ones produced by the Toronto Board of Education, should reinforce the impression that all is well with the education of South Asian youth. In one sense, of course, the above picture is true and is a legitimate source of satisfaction for the South Asian community. Yet, success has its own price, and the price that the South Asian community has paid has been threefold. First, the needs of those students who are not part of the above statistics have not been met satisfactorily. It should be noted that according to the Toronto Board of Education statistics, some 56% of the South Asian students were of a low socioeconomic status, and almost 30% of these students were terminating their secondary schooling before completion, 30%. Second, the school system continues to be Eurocentric and exclusionary, with South Asians largely absent from the curriculum, as well as various places across the education system. As far as the curriculum is concerned, the comments made in the East Indian Myths and Reality are still true. Third, South Asians continue to be subject to racial harassment because of their religions, accents, national origins, and dress with inadequate redress. Thus, for example, Sikh children and school board employees have been subject to ridicule and derision due to their religious requirement of wearing the kirpan. School boards, instead of dealing with the issue with sensitivity, have chosen to take punitive measures. Systemic and systematic anti-racist measures are required to address these concerns and to ensure a truly equitable educational environment for South Asian children. And there are two specific issues with respect to curriculum. There are 6 areas, in fact, that I want to address where work needs to be done. And they are curriculum, teaching of our languages, teacher training, and I know Superintendent Collins was talking about teacher training, employment and promotion, accommodation of what I call special needs, and dealing with expressions of racism. I don't want to talk about racial incidents. I think we need to talk about expressions of racism, because they are bigger than just incidents. As far as curriculum is concerned, there are 2 specific issues. First, how much and what kind of information do South Asian children receive about their heritage, that is, the history, culture, society, etc., of the land of their and their parents' origin? And second, what, if anything, do they learn about the presence, participation, struggles, and contributions of people of South Asian origins in Canada? Canada's links with the Indian subcontinent go back to the 18th century. Even so, such has been the grip of the Eurocentric worldview on educational decision makers and curriculum designers that these links continue to be excluded from curriculum guidelines and materials on Canadian history, society, literature, and so on. Consequently, for example, students do not find out that William Hall, a black Nova Scotian who won the first Victoria Cross to be won by a Canadian in 1857, won the Victoria Cross while fighting for Great Britain in India's first war of independence against the colonial masters. He actually died in Lucknow. They do not learn that Sarah Jeanette Duncan, an important Canadian writer of the late 19th, early 20th century, lived and wrote in India. They do not hear anything about the Continuous Voyage Act or the Komagata Maru incident, which are as significant pieces of Canadian history as the head tax against Chinese Canadians. They read virtually nothing about the contribution of South Asians to the building of the railroad or the development of the forest industry in British Columbia. They have no way of finding out that South Asians did not win the right to vote until after a long and bitter struggle. And finally, they read very little of the literature produced by many South Asian writers who are doing fine work right here and have received international awards and recognition for their work. The implications of these acts of omission and commission in the curriculum are that while South Asian students are denied the opportunity to learn about and take pride in their own heritage, other young people do not find out that South Asians are not recent immigrants to Canada, but that they have a rich history, a centuries-old relationship with this country, and much to offer in understanding modern history. The other issue is language learning and teaching of languages. Research shows that facility in one's first language has a direct bearing on academic achievement. However, local school boards have failed to ensure that learning of first languages other than English and French is accorded the high priority it deserves in the education system. To this day, at the elementary level, these languages, the so-called heritage languages, continue to be taught in most school boards either after school hours or on weekends as a privilege rather than as a legitimate educational activity. These heritage language programs are not yet entrenched in the regular school programs or in ministry guidelines. At the secondary level, very few non-European languages are taught because ministry guidelines regarding the teaching of these languages are weak and discretionary. This discriminatory treatment of South Asian languages may reinforce in South Asian children's mind the notion that their own ancestral languages are not important and have no place in their education. In their anxiety to, quote, belong, unquote, South Asian children often resist learning their first languages and are thus deprived of a major source of support for their self-esteem and identity. The next one is teacher training. During a recent training session on anti-racist education for school administrators of a major school board, I asked participants what they knew about the Continuous Voyage Act or the Komagata Maru incident. None of those present, many of whom had significant South Asian presence in their schools, had ever heard about these. Teacher training has lagged significantly behind the policies and pronouncements of governments and school boards stating their commitment to multiculturalism. It is clear that implementation of these policies and pronouncements will be as good as the knowledge, skills, and understanding of those charged with carrying them out. Teacher training programs specifically and post-secondary education generally have lagged behind the stated belief in multiculturalism. While a few faculties of education have begun to offer an optional course in multiculturalism, the majority of them continue to offer training which is not relevant to the needs of a diverse society. Consequently, South Asian children, and indeed all children, are being taught by people with very little knowledge and competence in teaching students from a variety of racial and cultural backgrounds. The next one that is important for me is employment and promotion practices. A recent document I helped to prepare for the Canadian School Boards Association speaks about the role of employment equity for racially visible people and Aboriginal peoples in the provision of anti-racist education. In that document, my co-author and I point out that, among other things, employment equity programs enable a school system to actively seek out people from a variety of racial and Aboriginal backgrounds who can reinforce the self-esteem and self-worth of racially visible and Aboriginal children by bringing with them a first-hand understanding of the experiences of these children and by validating the expectations of these children, as well as to expose all children to a diversity of experiences and learning teaching styles. I think it's very important that we recognize that there are legitimate different learning teaching styles, thereby counteracting stereotypes and prejudices as to who has knowledge and whose knowledge is legitimate, and finally, who can provide a variety of role models to legitimize the expertise and thus challenge discrimination. The experience of South Asians in the field of employment and promotion is not encouraging. Though some South Asians have been hired by school boards, they tend to be clustered in certain subject areas or in support positions. Moreover, despite the fact that most of them tend to be highly qualified and many of them have worked for a considerable number of years, they have been consistently denied promotions to positions of responsibility. Consequently, while there are a few South Asians in vice principal and principal positions, there are no South Asians in senior positions in Canadian schools. There's then the issue of accommodating special needs. The current controversy with respect to the right of Sikh students and school board employees to wear their kirpans to school points to the rigid, culturally biased and exclusionary nature of the school system. In spite of the vocal declarations of commitment to multiculturalism by the country's educational leaders, it is clear that the systems they lead and the people running them consider the tenets, assumptions, and practices of the dominant culture to be the norm. They are not prepared to make room for difference. Not only the Sikh students and staff, but Hindus and Muslims too experience barriers due to the failure to accommodate their special needs. These needs include, for example, exemption for Muslim children and adults from phys ed activities and other strenuous activities during the months of Ramadan when Muslims observe a month of fasting, time off for non-Christians for their religious observances, and availability of alternative foods in school and board cafeterias as well as on field trips. There's a tremendous disparity and widespread reluctance in dealing with these needs. This rigidity affects the ability of South Asian children and adults from different religious backgrounds to be equal participants in the educational systems. Finally, there is the issue of dealing with expressions of racism. School boards have done an extremely poor job of dealing with expressions of racism. Yet, South Asian students and school board employees are subject to such expressions regularly and widely. By expressions of racism, I mean not only the overt behaviors such as racist slurs, jokes, name-calling, innuendos, and acts of physical and emotional violence, but the covert behaviors as well, which include being centered out or ignored, labeled as troublemakers, subjected to differential expectations, and accorded differential treatment. Most school boards have been either reluctant to or ineffective in addressing such behaviors openly and honestly. Where policies do exist, they tend to deal with the overt types of racism, namely the incidents. While overt racism is very hurtful, it is covert racism expressed in seemingly innocent actions that affect the life chances of our youth and adults most severely. But when parents or employees bring these examples of racism to the attention of authorities, they are often dismissed as either being, quote, too sensitive or having, quote, no sense of humor. The result of the school's failure to deal effectively with expressions of racism is that South Asian students and staff feel alienated, hurt, angry, and diminished as human beings. Schools have to recognize that racism of any kind has no place within the school environment and that they have a responsibility to deal with it vigorously. I have described some key issues within the 6 areas of concern to South Asians. These issues must be acknowledged and resolved in order to ensure that South Asians are equal participants in the educational enterprise. It has been customary to think about discrimination based on race, culture, language, ethnicity, religion, and nationality only in terms of deliberate individual actions. As a result, the response by institutions have been in the form of discrete measures intended to address individual behaviors. What I have underscored are the systemic and often unconscious actions that have a discriminatory impact on South Asians in schools. I spoke earlier about the good education that young people expect and deserve. What I have discussed are the ways in which the education system has denied young South Asians this right. As young people committed to achieving this right, as parents and concerned members of the community, and as educators of South Asian origins, those of us who are in this gathering have to resolve to raise a vast hue and cry to ensure that the education system meets its responsibility to provide the service without discrimination. As parents, we must insist with our local schools that our needs be met. As community leaders and activists, we must raise these issues at every possible level, political level possible. I have no doubt that at the end of today's deliberations, you will resolve to take all action possible and necessary to achieve equal treatment with respect to education of our young people. At the same time, a final word for parents. I think it is very important that we recognize that growing up in a diverse society such as this is not easy. There is an onus on parents to ensure that children have the room and the freedom to grow up not in an insular, exclusive, and ethnocentric environment. They should be able to experience all the richness that this very diverse society offers and be valued and respected for doing that. Often, tensions have arisen in our homes because we have insisted that our children act, think, and feel in exactly the same ways as we have while we were growing up. Well, we did not always do what our parents wanted us to do, and we disagreed in a far more homogeneous society. Think how greater is the challenge faced by this generation of young people. We must respect their right to experience this diversity. This is how we will earn the credibility and the trust that must exist if we are to be able to extend the support needed to grow up as healthy, proud South Asians in this multicultural and multiracial society with all its pressures. In the end, I'd like to wish you all success in these deliberations. I hope that this is the beginning of a good thing and not the end of just another activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alok, for enlightening us with the history of South Asians in Canada and problems faced by parents, teachers, students of South Asian origin. And I know when you got the position, we were glad that we could make an appointment to see you. I remember about 7-8 years ago when we were very much concerned, and a number of our South Asian teachers filed complaints against the Toronto board or other boards. And we went to see the chief commissioner at that time, and it took us a number of months to make an appointment. And finally he came, and we, I think, finished the meeting in half an hour because the debate was so much heated that almost everybody left the room at that point. And it was full of frustration at that point. Now I know, since you are appointed, I know a number of calls I have directed to you. And the people are very happy. They could contact you at home, at school, at your work. And also, you're trying your best to solve the problems as many as you can. I know there is so much frustration, you can't solve all of this, but still you are trying your best. I remember you were race relation advisor to the Toronto board. You did a good job there. And thank you again for coming here and enlightening us. Thank you. I would like to call Veena Dadar to present a token of our appreciation to Alok.
Thank you, Mr. Soni, and thank you, Lou. I think we are rapidly approaching to the last major segment of today's activity. And before proceeding to the next step, I just want to remind you again that as I mentioned in the morning, that we have volunteers standing at the back. They have little cards there, and please feel free to ask for a card. Some cards are being passed around. If you have a question, please write it down and give it back to them. And in the interest of time, we will be able to deal with a lot more questions and avoid any debates from the floor. And the next step is that, as you know, that we had 2 workshops this morning, and based on the feedback that we got during lunchtime, I heard from lots of people that they were very stimulating and they were very thought-provoking and so on and so forth. I think it's important to let the whole group know a gist of the discussion or a gist of the summary that what took place in the respective workshop. And because we didn't have enough time, some of the questions that could not have been answered there can be answered here now. So I would now like to invite Sarabjit Golna, who was the facilitator for the youth group, to come and present a summary report. And if there are any recommendations from the group, please deliver those. Sarabjit.
Hello everybody. For those of you who were in my session, you know me well. And for those of you who weren't, hello. Mr. said that you said that I should present a summary and possibly some recommendations that we had. Well, for those of you who were in my session, you are aware that we had a limited amount of time, and I think the parents got started quicker because the parents don't have any hesitations, but somehow I think it's almost easier for them. With kids, you've got to warm up, and then when you warm up, then you don't know what to say, and then when someone starts talking, and then you think, okay, maybe I should say this, maybe I shouldn't, so it's a big thing. Our speakers, Gerard Dulesky, John Campion, and Romano Vergi, shed some great light on things that were happening in the different respective boards that they were working in. We really, in all honesty, can't really report too much back to you simply because I don't know if we really, in the context of really got anywhere. We discussed things, we talked about things, we got off track a couple of times, which is fine, that's understandable, that happens. We came back on track and we talked a little bit more. Basically, we touched on the policies, Etobicoke's policy and Scarborough's, and why it was that there weren't on a level of consistency, and people had personal comments to make, which is, that's fine, but when you have a limited amount of time to begin with, you can't afford to look at things in such finite detail. So, in all honesty, I can't really say that we got too far into it, and I was suggesting to Mr. Mehet and some other people that we need a weekend-long conference at the Harbour Castle Hilton, everybody. That's right. And then we have time to relax, and then we'll be in the right frame of mind, and then we can talk, and we'll come back with some really good suggestions for you then. But right now, seeing that we had less than, I believe, an hour and 5 minutes to talk, and most of that time went in me blabbing on, and I told you, if you let me talk, I'll go on forever, which is quite possible. But in all honesty, we have to do this again. We don't really have too much to report. And I know Mr. Seth is looking at me like, Sarvji, that's not what I want to hear, but I'm sorry, I don't want to do anything that didn't come out of my seminar. I enjoyed speaking to the people, I enjoyed listening to the comments. Unfortunately, the kids were not as open, but by the time we were getting ready for lunch, they were all ready to talk, weren't you guys? Look, they're sitting all over you. All of them had their hands up and, oh, me. So, unfortunately, we didn't have enough time, but I think that conferences like this are needed much more. I think they're needed on a larger level, perhaps even on a smaller level, where we can get into groups and talk, and that way the kids don't somehow feel as intimidated, perhaps, as they might feel in a large group. Racism is a topic that affects all of us every day. I don't know why it's taking us so long to discuss it, but finally we're on the forum where we can. So, with that in mind, I don't think I'm allowed to take any questions. Maybe comment, perhaps, if you wanted to comment on. Sure, go ahead.
The one comment that I wanted to make is, in my work that I do with youth at schools, the problem that they have is how to deal with the counselors and the teachers at
Right.
that time when an event happens.
When a racial incident happens.
Right, and I think I just spoke with a few students right now, and they were saying that they didn't get a chance to discuss that with you, although they would have liked to.
Definitely, and that's the problem, is that by the time we got started, and those of you who have this pamphlet in your hand, what we did try and do was talk about point number 3 under purpose, to develop, improve, strengthen the communication between youth, parents, the South Asian community, school boards, and the provincial governments. Touched on this topic for not even less than a minute, and the conversation turned elsewhere. Touched on objectives number 1, to identify the issues faced by the South Asian youth within the education system and bring them to the attention of the South Asian community and the authorities to find solutions. Well, in my group, the way the youths handled it didn't seem like there were any problems because none of them put their hand up. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just a matter of finding the right platform or having a little bit of time. We did touch a bit on objective number 4, to identify discriminatory problems faced by the South Asian youth in the school system and to provide the necessary information and skills to deal with racism. Our speakers, I think, walked away with some good points that they were, I guess, what's the word, that forced to look at, and I'm sure they're going to walk away and go ahead and take it back to wherever they can. Grace, I understand you have your hand up. Is that a comment to me, or Mr. I'm going to have to let it go here. So unfortunately, we don't really have too many recommendations to provide, but hopefully we'll do this again sometime soon, and we'll have lots for you. Thank you very much. I'm going to have to get back. Thanks.
Thank you. I would request one more time, please, if there's any question or comments from the floor, just raise your hand and somebody will give you a card, and that way we will keep it in the proper perspective, because the questions are probably for the panel members, and we will direct them to the panel members if you pass it on to the volunteers. One more point I want to mention is that there were recording people in both the sessions, and the proceedings have been recorded, minutes have been taken, and I was expecting that some of it will come up, that what the 3 speakers said in the respective workshop. But if the time does not permit us to go into a whole lot of detail in that area, we will be printing a short summary report of the seminar, and when we pass the evaluation sheet, if you need a copy of that, please make a note on there that you will be interested in a copy of the proceedings. I would now like to request Deo Carnahan to give a summary report from his workshop. Deo?
I'll be very brief. First of all, I want to say that the 3 presenters did an excellent job. And they represented the 3 levels of the educational system. We had a trustee from the political level, we had an administrator, a superintendent from the administration, and we also had a counselor who is one who implements the policies that the board wants to see implemented. So we were very well represented in that respect. 3 questions come to mind that were raised. 1, are our schools failing our students? Secondly, is the system discriminating against our qualified teachers in getting into the teaching profession? And thirdly, is the system responding to the concerns, to the grave critical concerns of our parents? And some of these presentations touched on these. I would just go through just 2 of the main important things that the speakers touched on. Rick, who is the superintendent of schools in Toronto, spoke about a system that cannot stem marginalization of any individual in our community, and also reminded us that we must be proud of our own minority background, as he is from the Jewish community. Sandy, who is the trustee in Peel Board, emphasized that the problem of the youths transcend all cultures, that their conflict because of religious practices, language, and others is not only contained within the South Asian community, but also in other communities as well. And one of the advices that she gave is that parents should get involved and participate in the school programs. And whenever there's a problem, that we should not feel intimidated in calling the trustees of the school board to let them know what our concerns are. And Sabra from the Etobicoke Board of Education, who is the counselor, she reminded the South Asians to look at some of the problems in a very analytical, in a very self-critical way in order to come to terms with some of the problems that we are facing. And one of the things she pointed out was that in her counseling experience, that absenteeism among students is one of the concerns, and that gives, of course, low performance by students, and that our youngsters are faced with almost four levels of competing values. 1, the home culture, the dominant society, the values as expressed by the peer groups, and of course the individual's own values. And this see our students being really sandwiched among all these conflicting values. Now, as to some of the questions were really pointed questions. They did not mince words. I cannot say whether the answers were satisfactory. I am not going to make that judgment. But as for recommendations, we did not come up with recommendations. I don't think it was part of our mandate. I think the mandate to make recommendations should come from the floor here as to what this group should take up as the problems and what other kind of programs we should put into place to lead the community from this point on, as Alok has just pointed out. Dr. Kumra, a very pointed question. Is there any goals and policies in place for the employment of South Asian teachers? And the answer that was given was that goals are in place, but they are not adequate. The second question was asked, what is Canadian culture? And the answer to that was, we must share and we must learn from each other. The third question was, does the Peel Board of Education have a South Asian Liaison Committee as the Toronto Board? And the answer was no, but we were advised to get involved and to make sure that such a committee is being set up by the Peel Board. The fourth question was, do you have counselors for parents? And that was directed to Sabra. And there is no such system as far in my experience. I don't think there is any such a system in any one of the boards that we can advise parents. The fifth question, what advice the counselor gives to a boy or girl who is facing conflict? And Sabra said, must listen to both sides and make the students aware of the consequences. But that advice has to be based on the individual in question, because they are not, they are individual circumstances in that. The sixth question, what is being done for grassroots people and how do board officials reach them? And the answer was, we must work together, but we need more definite answers than that. And the seventh question, why school board? Why the Scarborough School Board is not represented, and that is what we couldn't come up with, and I think that is that they will give you that answer in a while. And the last question, what policies are in place regarding racial harassment in the schoolyard and in schools, and how effective the implementation of these policies? And Rick from the Toronto board says, zero tolerance. And that, the effectiveness of that is shown by statistics that the number of harassment is decreasing. And before I close, I hope that we are aware that there is a commission that is going to study the educational system in Ontario, and I think this is a fitting group that some mechanism should be put into place so that we as South Asians can make full representation on that commission, and the same things that we are raising here that we are going to address in that report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dale. I just want to clarify one point. There was a person from the Scarborough Board of Education, and she was in the youth workshop, Rumana Varji, and unfortunately she had to leave early because she had some other engagement. So I just want to set the record straight that there was somebody from the Scarborough Board of Education. One of the panel members had a prior engagement, and he has to leave. So we're going to slightly modify the program, and I would request Seema Verma to make a presentation to Jerry. Jerry has another commitment, he has to leave. We appreciate your coming, and we're very thankful that you gave us your almost all Saturday, and we understand your pressing needs, and you can leave after that if you, our wishes you could stay longer, but seeing the circumstances, thank you very much.
Just by way of comment, I do have another engagement at 3 o'clock. I would differ a little bit about the reaction of the young people in that the meeting I was in. I think they put some very incisive questions to us. And I think they challenged me personally in terms of some of the things I have to do with my Board of Education. And also in terms of young people in this community taking an active part. Talking to one young person who says, I'm running for president of the student council in a school that has 1,300 students and that has a long tradition of people who look exactly like me running that school, tells me that young people in this community are making a difference. So I have a sense of optimism too. And, it's important for balance as well as some of the negatives of things we see. But I very much enjoyed my visit with you today. I have learned, and I can maybe make a little better difference, a little bigger difference in Etobicoke from having had this experience with you. I thank you very much.
That's a little token of our appreciation, Jared. Thanks very much. I have a fair number of questions already in hand. In the meantime, if you have any more questions, please pass it on to the volunteers. And let's deal with the questions that we have now. The first question is, my question pertains to the threat of isolating our youth faces. Our young people confront racism and marginalization at schools, and at the same time, they face disapproval from our parents for not abiding by the traditional parental values that we try to pass on to them. How do we handle this issue without alienating our children? I would suggest that any panel member, please feel free to grab the mic and whoever feels to provide the answer. I hope someone does.
In order to just check whether I understood the question properly, I would like to attempt to paraphrase it for myself. And for the person who did submit that question, if I misunderstood you, please would you correct me? I believe the question, the essence of the question is that how do we help the youth from not alienating themselves from the parents? And I think I would like to add another piece, is a parents alienating from the youth as well. That's a very complex question. It does not have a simple answer, and I'm not going to pretend to have a glib answer to that question. But I would suggest to you that many of the speakers today have recommended, have suggested, have given some advice, and I think even members of the audience have, that we need to begin with an honest and open dialogue. We need to be open to hearing all sides, getting the different perspectives. And then I think to use the words of one of my co-panelists, is that the open dialogue will assist us in reaching a common ground. And I think that is very, very critical in terms of the approach that we take. In terms of racism, I think what we have been doing here, again with the numerous speakers and with the audience, is naming the issue. We cannot take a bystander approach. I say that anti-racism work is not a spectator sport. We have to get right in the middle of it. We have to address it, whether it is at the institutional level or at some middle level, and also very critically at the individual level. We've got to also, and I think I'm just going to re-quote what I mentioned earlier, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the racist in us all? Or where is the racist in us? So I think that we need to also deal with our own prejudices, biases in terms of how we view youth, how we view women, how we view adults on the part of the youth, because we all have stereotypes and myths that we like to perpetuate for our own specific agenda. And I think I'll close here because I just wanted to give a broad perspective.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to take that?
Try that. Just a short comment on finding the common ground and some advice for parents caught in this dilemma. Remember, if you're a parent of growing children, adolescents, regardless of what group you represent, you have this problem. It's just exacerbated a little more if you want to maintain the values of your culture and the homeland. But the advice I would give parents is engage in this dialogue, engage in this exchange, engage in this attempt to find common ground with your child, the same way as you would expect host society to engage in finding the common ground with your group. It's no different. Just like you expect to be able to maintain your individuality and your culture, having to make some compromises to find the common ground with the changes the society makes. It's really the same equation with you and your children. And each case is an individualized case. The comment that I enjoy hearing from Sabra, when she has been confronted as a counselor with young people who threaten to leave home because there's so much tension in values conflict with their parents, when the issue is explored and the consequences, and that's her word again, are presented to the young person, you may choose to do that, but these are the things you will leave behind. That in 99% of the cases, the child chooses a way of accommodating and compromise in order to stay in that home. Because we've all provided good homes for our kids. They're not looking for excuses to leave. They're not looking for excuses to alienate themselves. They're looking for attempts to express their growing individuality, both as adolescents and growing people, and as also as members of a cultural group that live in a larger society. So it is complex, but be open, dialogue, and be prepared to try to find that common ground. Often the common ground between groups that differ, is very, very infinitesimal. But if you find it, it will be expanded. It's not finding the common ground that leads to continuation of conflict.
Thank you. Alok was trying to to leave, but one of our volunteers stopped him almost near the door. There are a couple of questions, Alok, if you don't mind asking before you leave, please. And I'll read them both together, and they're very similar. First one is, Mr. Mukherjee, my question is about effective implementation of human rights in public and private sectors regarding hiring, working conditions, resistance and attitude encounters, including the problems faced by the students. What is being done and how can it be improved? Reasons for above question is many institutions feel satisfied by putting the policies in place, but much is ignored by effective implementation action. If brought to the attention, it's either swept under the carpet or you're considered as a troublemaker. And I'll read the second question too, which is also somewhat related. In this time of government cutbacks in public and greater public sectors, there's a great danger on the part of the person in power. There's a greater discretion on the part of the person in power to lay off, and there's every possibility of visible minorities being victimized in the name of cutbacks. How should minorities deal with it, and can the governments be made aware of this danger?
I think the two questions call for another session. But seriously, the first question is a very important one because many of the boards and other organizations. I think the question about how to make institutions go beyond policy in enforcing human rights practices, etc., is a very important one. And a few days ago, I believe a week ago, there was a court case that went to a court in Quebec. It came out of a human rights complaint lodged by a black teacher in the Oka area. He was harassed continuously by the students to the point where he had a mental, experienced so much pressure, he took time off on illness, etc., and the board penalized him, held him the victim or responsible for not discharging his duties properly. He filed a human rights complaint. The board's plea was that they have an anti-racism policy, how could they discriminate against him? The case went to the courts, and the court decision by a judge is very, very important. The judge said it is not enough for boards or institutions to have a policy. They must be able to demonstrate that they are implementing the policy. And I'm sure that that case is going to have a significant role to play in human rights complaints against school boards in this area and other areas. I think it's quite a precedent-setting case.
That question actually came from me. I'm Bajinder Mann, and I've spoken to you a few times on the phone.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Mr. Mukherjee. Okay, I have tried at my level at all the stages that I could follow through